In this Secrets of Strixhaven draft meta update, I'll be providing you with the most current information on the format so you can crush your next draft. Kicking things off with the format news, our first headline is Lorehold bounces back. In the original Strixhaven format, this archetype was quite weak because the designers hadn't quite figured out how to build a red-white deck that wasn't just being aggro, that was trying to be built around this leaves the graveyard synergy. But they cracked the code and they put some juiced cards into the set for this archetype this time around, and so it's a great deck that you should be looking to draft. A card like Molten Note is a great example. It's a flexible and powerful removal spell in the early turns, and then has flashback to not only get you a 2-for-1 in the late game by being a removal spell that you can cast twice, but also have a card that leaves the graveyard so that you can fuel your synergies, or a card that if you can get it into your graveyard without casting it, provides you with some extra value. So that's a nice card for this deck. A card like Startled Relic Sloth is another great example of the sort of cards that fit really well into this deck. It's 4 mana for a 4/4 with Trample and Lifelink, which is already a great stat line, and then it also gives you this graveyard synergy by having, at the beginning of combat on your turn, exile up to 1 target card from a graveyard. So putting a card that helps you work with your graveyard synergies, your leaves the graveyard cards, helps trigger those, but also just being a good stat line. And especially because this deck can play more mid-rangey, getting a big lifelinker can also be really nice to help you extend the game. And then Arc of Hunger is a superstar rare for this deck. It's a 4 mana card advantage engine that also does tons of damage to your opponent, gains you some life over the course of the game, works great with your other synergy pieces like your flashback spells, your Startled Relic Slots, other cards of that nature, and is overall the sort of card you should be first picking if you see. You should be taking it very highly, often switching into Lorehold if you get past it. It's just a fantastic card and fits great in this strategy, and overall the deck is quite strong and one you should be looking to draft. Next up, Converge is on the menu. This is a mechanic that rewards you for spending multiple colors of mana to cast your spells, and in some formats that are more based around just playing 2-color decks, Converge wouldn't be quite as powerful. But in this format, there are a lot of late game decks that can really leverage these Converge cards, use the mana fixing available in the format to play these cards for 4 or sometimes even the full 5 colors and just get really powerful spells. A card like Snarl Song, when you're playing it for 4 or 5 colors, makes you 2 big creatures, gains you a big chunk of life, and for 6 mana, that absolutely destroys aggro and also provides a lot of board presence in the mid-range and control matchups. A card like Arcane Omens can be an absolute mirror breaker when you're playing these control matchups where both players have a bunch of cards in hand. Maybe they don't have access to counter magic though, and you spend 5 mana, make them discard 4 or 5 cards. Sometimes even 3 cards can be good enough to make them empty their hand, and all of a sudden they have no cards in hand. You can start taking over the game, and Arcane Omens can be a great card in that deck. And then Together as One as a rare, it's 6 mana for a sorcery. Converge, target player draws X cards. Together as One deals X damage to any target, and you gain X life, where X is the number of colors of mana spent to cast this spell. So if you're spending this for the full 5 colors, it's a draw 5, deal 5, gain 5. For 4 colors, it's also pretty good as a draw 4, deal 4, gain 4. And this is the sort of card that you should be first picking if you see it in the format, and then trying to build around it. In some formats, these would be kind of niche payoffs for maybe if you're playing a multicolored deck that happens to get there. But in this format, it's an actual established archetype you can draft. There's plenty of mana fixing you can go for. And Together as One as the sort of payoff that is a great example of these sorts of cards. This is a card you should be trying to draft around, should be trying to build around. If you see it, it's the sort of thing that can be a signal to try to draft the deck. And as a result, Converge is definitely something that you should be trying to draft. One final note about the Converge decks is that Converge doesn't have to be based around green in this format. Oftentimes blue-red is a good home for a lot of these Converge payoff cards, so you'll play blue-red and then splash something like an Arcane Omens or blue-red, and if you get lucky enough to get it Together as One, you'll put that into your deck. So you don't have to be green to be playing these. Just make sure you prioritize fixing, especially like cards that can tap for multiple colors, or the lands that are the dual lands that come into play tapped and can tap for multiple colors to help you with your Converge cards. Because if you have some Converge cards and are, say, playing a blue-red deck, playing a red-white tap land in your deck can be a nice way to get an extra color for Converge when you do happen to draw those Converge cards without a huge downside. Next, Late Wither Bloomers is our final headline because Witherbloom so far has been a bit of a weaker archetype. There's a couple of reasons for this. For starters, people generally tend to prioritize good removal spells, creatures that look pretty sizable, and black-green kind of has those cards, so it was a bit overdrafted in the format early compared to how powerful the cards and the archetype actually was. Another aspect of Witherbloom is it looks like it would be a good home for a lot of these splashier decks, but many of the Witherbloom cards point towards a more aggressive direction. You can actually play a black-green aggro deck as a life gain aggro deck, which kind of doesn't necessarily jive with a lot of the ways that you would be kind of thinking about a black-green deck that gains some life. You think that maybe helps you go to the mid game, go to the late game. But a card like Bogwater Lumerette as a 2-mana 2/2 that gains you a life can often be a nice aggressive tool when paired with a card like Pest Mascot, which grows when you're gaining life. And so because of the specific payoffs available in the set, this can be a nice aggressive deck that doesn't have to try to go over the top. It can be a like curve your Bogwater Lumerette into your Pest Mascot, try to beat your opponent down before they're able to start playing their powerful converge cards, before their blue-red deck gets to the late game to start playing powerful instants and sorceries, before the red-white deck gets to start casting its flashback spells and outvalue you. The black-green deck kind of has this weird situation where in almost every format ever, if you're playing black-green against red-white, you'd expect the black-green deck to have the late-game edge, and so you would draft your deck accordingly. But in this format, black-green kind of has to take the aggressive role in that matchup because of all the flashback spells and all of the value that the red-white deck can generate. And that's also an unintuitive play pattern and something you need to learn about this format, where I just want to talk about Black Loafing Pest as I say, but where if you do get a card like Black Loafing Pest early, you kind of just want to build this like deck that can start snowballing the game, and you play this like 3-mana 3/4 that starts growing your entire team, aggressively attacking. It's not the sort of card where Black is like a value engine that gets you value over time. If you play Black and then your creatures are just like not doing much and you're just sitting there letting the game go long, your opponent's going to start drawing like card draw spells and things like that, and just like using these cards aggressively is important. And so I think Witherbloom may be poised for a late game surge. Once it starts getting less drafted, players are going to be like, oh, Witherbloom isn't winning as much, I'm not going to draft as much. You can get past these powerful payoffs later. And then once you start gearing your deck to be more of this aggressive beatdown deck, using these powerful tools that can be quite effective, especially if you're getting past them late because other players aren't drafting the archetype as much and they start fighting over the other archetypes as well. So just wanted to note that about Witherbloomer. Stay tuned, like keep your eyes peeled for it, because it can be the sort of deck that as it becomes less popular, it can get better because you're getting these powerful cards later and you're better understanding the strategy. Next up is the meta market, and so kicking things off, we'll start with the archetype rankings. At number 1 is Black-White Repartee Aggro. This might be a little bit surprising because early on in the format, Red-White was kind of the top dog. It was a kind of surprising deck because, especially as I mentioned, it was a bit weaker early on, but Repartee Aggro has made just been consistently powerful throughout the format. And as more players hear, oh, red-white is a great deck, I want to draft red-white, you get the good cards for the red-white deck less frequently. And so Repartee Aggro, just kind of by being a little bit less in your face, there's a little bit less hype around the deck, you get the cards a little bit easier for the deck. And as a result, I have it at number 1 now. If this was a week 1 meta update, then red-white would be number 1, but this is the current state of the meta, and so I have Repartee Aggro with a slight edge over red-white. If you don't know what the deck does, it basically plays a 2-drop or early plays like Inkling Mascot that can be aggressively slanted, that rewards you for targeting creatures with instants and sorceries, uses cards like Quillblade Laureate that use like, they can be creatures. They also have prepared spells like the Twofold Intent on Quillblade Laureate to help you work with Repartee and push damage, and then a card like Melancholic Poet is a nice common for this deck that can help you win the game if the game does stall out, because it can just start draining your opponent, dealing extra damage when you're casting those instants and sorceries. So that's kind of what red-white is doing. Now, that's not to say that red-black, white-black is doing. That's not to say red-white isn't a good deck. Red-white is still a great deck. These are kind of like, depending on the nature of your pod, if red-white isn't being drafted as highly as maybe it should be, red-white is still a very, very strong deck. And so starting in white and then choosing which one of these lanes to go down is a great place to start in your drafts. But red-white Leaves the Graveyard is a great deck. We've already talked about it a bit, but it uses a card like Wilt in the Heat, which gets a nice little boost by costing 2 less if a card left your graveyard this turn, to be a really powerful removal spell instead of like a mediocre removal spell. And so that sort of supercharging of your cards by having things leave the graveyard is what red-white's all about. Rubble Rouser, another fantastic card, gets you a card into your graveyard when it comes into play by rummaging. Then it ramps your mana a bit to help you cast these flashback spells. It deals some damage to your opponent, which helps you just chip away at them, and also makes a card leave your graveyard, which works with your synergies. And then Stone Docent is a great 2-drop for this deck. Nice little aggressive play as a 3/1. This card might get a little bit worse over time if the black-green deck makes a bit of a resurgence, because the 1/1 pests do kind of embarrass this card. You don't really want to be trading your 3/1 2-drop with a card that like randomly made a pest from your opponent. Like the pests having 1/1s in the format would make a 3/1 worse, but the black-green deck is still not the most powerful, and even if they do have some pests, you can just keep this guy back on blocks, because as I mentioned, the red-white deck sometimes even has the inevitability in the red-white versus black-green matchup. And so Stone Docent has a 2-drop that can then in the middle stages of the game, once it's in your graveyard, exile itself, surveil you 1 to help you find more action, but end up gaining you 2 life while working with your Leaves the Graveyard synergies is a nice 2-drop for this strategy. Next up at number 3 is blue-red Spells Control. This does oftentimes dip into a Converge kind of deck as a blue-red deck that maybe splashes 1 or 2 Converge payoffs, but Spells Control can be really nice. There's good removal spells in red, great card advantage in blue, and the blue-red multicolored cards are quite powerful, and it does have some good tools to splash. So in blue-red, you're looking for cards like Stress Stream, which is like a blue-red, 3 blue-red, deal 5 to a creature, look at the top 2 cards of your library, put 1 into your hand, the other on the bottom of your library. There is an Opus mechanic, which does reward you for casting instants and sorceries in blue-red, and specifically for ones that cost 5 or more mana. That can be quite nice with those cards. A lot of those ones are creatures that are kind of like tempo-based creatures, and the tempo strategy in red-white tends to be not as powerful because a lot of these late game tools are just what you would rather be doing in red-white. So if you see these tempo elements and you see enough of them, you can try to build the tempo variant of the deck. But generally speaking, if you're playing blue-red, you should be looking to play control because there's great tools for it and you're going to have a lot more redundancy. So even if you have a couple of the tempo elements going into pack 1 and maybe even pack 2, once pack 3 rolls around, you'll start seeing these more late game cards and kind of wish, oh, I kind of wish I was playing this more late game variant in many cases. Another card that's great in blue-red, maybe as a bit of a surprise, is Divergent Equation. It's XX blue. For an instant, return up to X target instant and or sorcery cards from your graveyard to your hand, then exile Divergent Equation. You can cast this relatively consistently in your games for X equals 3 mana and just have it be your win condition a lot of the time. Getting back 3 premium spells at that stage of the game is going to oftentimes be game winning, and at the lower rarities, like being uncommon, not just like a rare or mythic, this can definitely be one of your win conditions in your deck. And even if you have to cast it for X equals 2, that's not the end of the world. Generally, you don't want to cast it for X equals 1 mana, but sometimes in a pinch you might have to do so, but just a really effective late game card advantage tool. And then third here I want to talk about is Tablet of Discovery. 2 and a red for an artifact. When it enters mill a card, you may play that card this turn, and then it taps for red or taps for red, spend this mana only to cast instant and sorcery spells. When you first see this card, you probably think of the Lorehold deck because it does interact with the graveyard. If you mill over a card and then you can cast it from your graveyard that turn, it'll work with your cards that leave the graveyard. And it is a good card in the Lorehold deck, but it's even better in the blue-red deck because the blue-red deck casts a lot more instants and sorceries, generally speaking, and so it can use that mana a lot better. And casting a mana rock that taps for 2 mana is really, really strong, especially because if, for example, you play this on turn 4 with a land drop to give, and you like a land drop to give. So you play this on turn 4 before you play your land. If you mill over a land, you can play the land, which is great. If you mill over an instant or sorcery, oftentimes you can be like, do something like mill over an instant and sorcery and then play an island and then cast your 3 mana instant or sorcery that you mill over, something of that nature. That can be a really powerful play pattern. And then you start casting your Divergent Equations for a little bit faster because you have that 2 mana instead of just 1 mana from Tablet. And so that tapping for 2 mana ability is a key part of the card. And even though it looks, oh, this card goes great in Lorehold, it goes even better in these blue-red control decks. Next up, going to the archetypes rankings, is this blue-green multicolored control deck. Again, there are sometimes going to be situations where you get enough blue and green cards where you don't even need to splash, or you don't see the mana fixing somehow, or you just don't have see any good cards worth splashing, and you build like a blue-green tempo deck or something like that. But generally speaking, blue-green is a good home for these multicolored control decks. There is some pretty good mana fixing available in blue-green, and so building a multicolored control deck is pretty good. And as you might see, it's an archetype ranking. There is going to be something at the top, something at the bottom. I would say that black-white and red-white are kind of the top dogs, generally speaking, if you can get them. And then you kind of end up in this kind of situation where, depending on what you have, these blue-green decks, these blue-red decks sometimes can blend together quite frequently, depending on what you see as your base colors, where the fixing you see is, stuff of that nature, where sometimes you just kind of play these like multicolor piles that feel relatively similar. So this is kind of like the second tier of archetypes. As the multicolor control deck, you'll notice even on the blue-green deck, I'm highlighting a card that's not in blue-green because I do want to talk about the splashing aspect. A card like Paradox Surveyor, great card, 3 mana, 3/3, gets you a land, helps you hit your land drop so you can get to the Lake King. It doesn't exactly fix your mana because it doesn't like let you choose a land from your deck to go get, but digging 5 to look for a land, or sometimes you'll have an X spell to go get, that's just a really nice 3-drop. Studious First Year is an absolutely fantastic way to kickstart your curve in this deck. Play this on turn 1, turn 2, search up your land, search up your splash, ramp your mana. Really nice, effective card. And then Archaic's Agony is the exact sort of card you're kind of looking for in this deck. When you're casting this for 4 or 5 colors, you're really happy. You can kill like a 2/2 and then exile the top 2 cards of your library. Kill or 3 cards of your library if you're casting this for the full 5 colors. It might seem implausible to cast things for full 5 colors if you haven't played this format a ton, or if you just aren't used to building these multicolored decks, but it's definitely something you can do in this format. And so taking these cards when you're playing like a blue-green deck that's hoping to splash in many cases, because you want to maximize your Studious First Years that you're getting and things like that. Studious First Year just ramping you is a lot worse than Studious First Year that's ramping you and fixing your mana to enable your powerful payoffs. And so when you get these really strong cards, you want to be able to use them. Casting them for 4 or 5 colors can be really, really strong. And it's a nice little like thing you can do in your blue-green decks. So keep an eye out for these sorts of cards. And then the final deck we're going to be looking at in the ranking is this black-green deck, which I have classified now as a life gain aggro deck. Initially, it looked more like a life gain value deck, but life gain aggro makes a lot more sense as you look at the cards and what actually finds success in the format. So if you look at the black-green deck, Essence Knit Scholar is absolutely fantastic. This is a really problematic card when you're facing the black-green deck and one you absolutely want to have when you're playing the deck. It's 3 mana for a 3/1. When it enters, you get a 1/1 black and green pest token with whenever this token attacks, you gain 1 life. So 4/2 worth of stats spread across 2 bodies. And then at the beginning of your end step, if a creature died under your control this turn, draw a card. So making multiple bodies, letting you kind of send your creatures into the red zone, and then your opponent doesn't really want to block them, especially if it's going to be a trade. So if you have like Essence Knit Scholar after you play your 2/2, you attack with your 2/2, your opponent doesn't really ever want to block. It helps you push a lot of damage. So it looks like a value card. It is a value card, but it's also a value card that will oftentimes lead to you pushing damage because your opponent doesn't want to give you that value. So all of a sudden, your pest token is dealing a couple points of damage. And if you were just playing a value deck, dealing 3 or 4 damage to your opponent wouldn't necessarily matter. But if you're playing this as an aggro deck where the damage does matter, all of a sudden they're like, well, I guess I just have to block the pest token. Then all of a sudden the card gets a lot better because you're getting that value. So if you're able to slant aggressive, a card like this gets better, which is kind of the point of the black-green deck, which makes sense when you think about it. But when your initial instinct is, oh, it's a value card, so I want to be playing a value game. And that's not always how it works. Thornfist Striker is another great example of a card that your black-green deck is looking for. It's a 3 mana 3/3 with Ward 1, so it's a little bit tricky to interact with, but solid stat line as well. And it has Infusion. Creatures you control get +1/+0 and have Trample as long as you gain life this turn. So all of a sudden, all of your random pest tokens are attacking as 2/1s. Again, not a great card if you're playing really a defensive deck. There's not a ton of ways to gain life really on your opponent's turn necessarily. But if you are playing an aggressive deck, all of a sudden, when you attack with your pest, you gain a life, your creatures get buffed, they can get trample. This guy will become a 4/3 trampler. It's this aggressive slanted black-green card, which gives it a unique angle in the format and is definitely something that you should be kind of thinking about when you're drafting this deck. How can I start applying some pressure to my opponents? Thornfist Striker does a great job of that. And then Luwin Exchange Student is another really good card for this deck, especially with this pest token angle with a card like Thornfist Striker or this Essence Knit Scholar. For 4 mana, you get a 3/4, it enters prepared, and you can cast the prepared spell to make a 1/1 pest token for just 1 mana, and then re-prepare Luwin by exiling creatures from your graveyard. So you have these situations where you have gotten some early pressure down, you've traded off some creatures, and then you play Luwin, make like 3 pest tokens by just constantly casting Pest Friend, and then all of a sudden you have a huge army you can attack in with all of them. If you have a card like Thornfist Striker, it gets really effective because those pests are going to get buffed. If you have a card like Essence Knit Scholar, your opponent's going to be killing your pests because they have to block to stop the damage, and then you're going to be drawing extra cards. And Luwin overall is just a really nice card for your black-green decks. This is just a one last final look at the archetype rankings, just so you can kind of see them all in one place. Black-white at number 1, red-white a close second. They're pretty much 1 and 2, but they're really, really close. And depending on how the meta shifts, it could easily shift back to red-white being the top dog, then blue-red spells control and green-blue multicolor control being very similar in many cases, and sometimes just being like, oh, I saw more green cards for my early game, so I'm playing blue-green base instead of the red-blue base. And then black-green life gain aggro deck, as I said, Witherbloom could be a late Witherbloom bloomer, as I was talking about at the beginning, once more players figure out how to properly play the deck as more aggressively slanted, and also when players are maybe drafting it a little bit less highly, because a lot of the times these black-green cards just look appealing and so are taken pretty highly early in formats, and then as people lose with them, they'll draft them a little bit less. You can get a much more powerful version of the deck. Moving on to the color rankings. In Secrets of Strixhaven, because there are fewer archetypes, color rankings are generally pretty tied to how powerful those individual color combinations are. So white, probably no surprise to see that at number 1. It's a part of like the 2 best decks, those proactive aggro white decks. Next up is red. Red-white is a very strong color combination in this format. The blue-red deck is also quite good. You get access to a lot of good multicolored cards in both blue-red and red-white. So red coming in at number 2. The removal spells in particular really, really nice. Next up is black, also has great removal spells. Black-white is a great deck in the format. And so even though black-green maybe lags behind a little bit, you are still happy starting your deck with some black cards, trying to pair them with white. Or if you are seeing a lot of the black-green cards, you can get an underdrafted deck sometimes. Next up is blue. The individual blue commons aren't always the strongest. The blue multicolored cards are quite good. And some of the blue control elements are very strong as well. And so blue can definitely be a nice deck, nice little color to get like key pieces from, though some of the like individual commons in blue are a bit lackluster, so maybe it's not the most deep of colors. And then last place is green. It's definitely a like solid color you can draft. None of these colors are like terrible. It's not like the sort of thing where like white is miles ahead of everything else. It's just like green. If you are playing green, you tend to be looking to play green and then splash other colors, which isn't necessarily like, oh, I'm playing green because green has all of these crazy cards in it. It's more like I'm playing green because it's an enabler that can let me splash 3 or 4 of the colors, and then I'm playing this multicolored green pile of cards. And you end up in this situation where it's not like, oh, I'm not playing green because all of its commons are insane. I'm playing green because it lets me play multiple colors where there are strong cards. And so that's why green comes in at number 5, but it's definitely a color you can happily draft, and it does lead to some really strong decks with these multicolored control decks and can sometimes be okay. And as I was mentioning before, black-green being a bit of a weaker deck inherently does also make black and green a little bit worse than if black-green was like a good deck. And so keep that in mind with these colors. This is more, of course, as a tiebreaker than as anything like really like you shouldn't be like forcing one of these colors and avoiding the other ones. It's more so like if you have pick between a good white card and a good green card, taking the good white card first can often pay some dividends if you are trying to bias yourself in that direction a little bit. Next up, for the format speed, I would classify this format as a medium format that's a little bit on the slower side, but there are these aggressive elements. The fact that the red-white deck plays a bit of a slower mid-range game a lot of the time does contribute to this, but you do have to keep yourself honest with your deck building, because these black-white decks can be very formidable and very fast. But the fact that a lot of players aren't currently building black-green decks as these aggressive decks, the fact that black-white is just one of the 5 archetypes, and the fact that you can end up in these control mirrors where both players are playing 4 or 5 colors and just these crazy haymakers, does mean that I would classify this as a more medium speed format, but one that you still want to be impacting the board state early. The games can take a while, but if you can get an early advantage, it can put pressure on your opponent, make them use their cards suboptimally. So not the slowest of the slow formats, not the fastest of the fast, but if you aren't playing against the silver quill matchup, the black-white deck, you can end up in these slower matchups. And so I would classify this as a medium format. You want to have some card advantage. You want to have kind of some tools to take over the late game, unless you're playing these super aggressive decks, which there are a couple, but because there's 5 decks and one of them is the main aggro deck, it tends to be a little bit slower. Next up is the All-Star team. I wanted this section to talk about some cards in this video that I wasn't able to talk about in the other sections. And these are the commons I wanted to talk about. Pursue the Past is a much better card than it reads. It's one of those cards where you first read, you're like, okay, discard a card, draw 2 isn't really where you want to be, especially for a red-white deck. But as I've mentioned, red-white plays this mid-range role pretty well. This card not only helps you fill your graveyard to work with other synergies and cards that like make you exile a card from your graveyard for some sort of effect, but also just helps you dig through your deck if you ever top deck this in the mid game when you are holding a land in your hand, because you should be if you have Pursue the Past in your deck. If you top deck this in the mid game, you discard that land, draw 2, maybe flash it back on the same turn, even discard another land, draw 2 more cards. All of a sudden you're massively ahead of your opponent and you feel pretty good about the situation. Pursue the Past also like puts you up a card, because when you flash it back, you are discarding a card to draw 2, but you didn't have to like use the Pursue the Past from your hand. So this actually does provide you with card advantage, which maybe isn't first apparent, because usually when you discard a card and draw 2, you spent the card that you were casting and the card you discarded and drew 2 cards as a replacement. So it wasn't actually putting you up cards, but with Pursue the Past, you end up a card once you've cast it and flashed it back. Or if you somehow end up with it in your graveyard and then flash it back, you end up a card. And that's definitely good upside to have on this sort of common that helps you play the mid-range game that red-white's trying to play. Next, I wanted to discuss Potioner's Trove. This card absolutely rocks. It plays so much better than it looks. That was a little bit of a mana rock pun, but hopefully you noticed it and laughed before I pointed it out, because as we all know, explaining the joke makes it funnier. But 3 mana. You can tap it for any color, and then you can tap it to gain 2 life, activate only if you cast an instant or sorcery this turn. That second line on the card makes a huge difference to its playability, because not only does it help you play like a blue-red deck that then splashes these converge spells, but it also helps you stabilize if you are playing against these aggressive decks, which do sometimes have like some reach, some direct damage burn spells, some life drain in the case of a black-white deck. And so being able to have Potioner's Trove as not only a way to be like, okay, I'm playing a blue-red deck and I'm splashing a Snarl Song which is the green converge card that makes some X's that we already looked at. If you're playing like your blue-red deck, you can be like, okay, I'm just playing Potioner's Trove. I don't have to play that many lands of these other colors. Or you could be even in a situation where you are playing a converge card that's within your colors, like you're playing maybe a blue-green deck and playing the Snarl Song, which is a green card, but Potioner's Trove lets you tap for black mana, which you don't need a black land because you don't have any black spells maybe, but you can still get an extra converge out of your cards. And so Potioner's Trove is great for that, great for helping you stabilize in the mid to late game when you're able to gain that 2 life, and overall is a much better card than maybe it first reads as, and one you should be prioritizing in your drafts. And then finally, wouldn't be All-Star Commons list without Elite Interceptor. This card is an absolute rock star in black-white decks as an early drop that then lets you tap an opposing creature to trigger your repartee, draw your replacement card, hit for a bunch of damage. It's also great in red-white. Don't just see this card and be like, oh, it only goes in black-white. It's also just a great card in red-white decks, though of course it's better in black-white, but still, great card. You should be taking this very highly, and it's a card that you should sometimes even be first picking out of your packs when you see it because it is that good. Next up, some uncommon all-stars I wanted to talk about. Pestbrood Sloth doesn't look that flashy. 4 mana, 4/4 reach. Then when it dies, you make 2 black and green pest creature tokens. With whenever those tokens attack, you gain life, as with all of the pests in this set. This card doesn't look that flashy. 4 mana, 4/4 maybe doesn't jump off the page when you read this card, but it's excellent because the green decks just want these tools to help slow the game down a lot of the time. And Pestbrood Sloth, even if your opponent kills it, you get 2 1/1s that can be used for blocking. Or if you're in this more aggressive role, you attack, they trade something off for it, all of a sudden you've got more blockers. It's just like a 4/4 that dies into 2 1/1s is just a great stat line. The reach helps it block things. And overall, this is a card you should be taking. And I wanted to highlight some of these cards in particular because they're not multicolored cards, but they still fit into any of the decks that play their color and are cards that you should be taking very highly as a result, because sometimes the most powerful cards in this set are the multicolored ones, which you should still be taking highly because you want to make sure that you have the most powerful cards available to you once you know what archetype you're landing in. But these cards are both powerful and flexible, and that's a great place to be. Next up is Impractical Joke. Single red mana, sorcery, deal 3 damage to up to 1 target creature or planeswalker, but generally the creature part is the most relevant part of that. And dealing 3 for 1 mana is just fantastic in any red deck, helps you in your slow decks, helps you in your fast decks. This is a card you should be taking incredibly highly. And then Environmental Scientist is just an incredibly messed up card. If you see this card early, it really makes you want to play green, makes you want to play green multicolored, because then you're getting more value from a 2/2 that enters and searches up a basic land to your hand. It's just a great stat line for 2 mana that also gets you card advantage and fixes your mana, helps you hit your land drops, just plays fantastically well, and is a card you should be taking incredibly highly. This card is insane, and one of those cards that when I first read it, I was blown away. Next up is Nicolai Sleepers. We're wrapping things up with this. First up is Strixhaven's Sky Coach. Now, this is a very powerful card. It's 3 mana for a 3/2 flying vehicle, so it's not a creature unless you crew it for the crew cost of 2, and when it enters, you may search your library for a basic land card, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle. The reason I wanted to talk about this card as a sleeper is because when you first read this card, the first thing you think is, oh, it's a 3/2 flyer, and then you're like, oh, it's a vehicle, so maybe it's not the best. And then you see the part where it searches up a land, and your instinct all of a sudden shifts towards thinking about the basic land aspect of this card, and you're just like, okay, well, maybe I'll use this in my multicolor decks and it'll be a good fixer. And that is a good home for this card, but it's also just a good card in aggressive decks too, because the 3/2 flying vehicle aspect of the card is at its best in the more aggressive decks that you're going to be playing. So this is a card that you really love taking early because it fits into any deck well, and it fits like better into the aggressive decks than you might think, because even aggressive decks still care about hitting their land drops. And so if you play it in the obvious multicolored shell, you're pretty happy to get your land drops and things of that nature, but you are using it to like fix your mana for something like Sundering Archaic or something of that nature. But you're also playing it in your aggressive decks just as a 3-drop that can then you play it on turn 3. On turn 4, you play another creature, crew it up, hit them for 3 in the air. All of a sudden, you've got a 3/2 flyer basically that you don't really care about the fact that you have to tap your creatures to crew it, and that's a really nice place to be. Fixes your mana for a card like Sundering Archaic, or if you are playing a deck that wants to splash that doesn't have access to blue mana, so maybe you're playing a blue-red deck, it can help you splash white for Colossus of the Blood Age, or if you're just playing a red-white deck, it can be just a good card to put into your red-white deck. The cards that I wanted to highlight with this one, it was kind of weird to just put a random aggressive creature on here, but just putting like a 2-drop or like a random 4-drop that you're going to play after your Sky Coach, you're pretty happy with that as well. So it's really good for fixing your mana, it's really good for fixing in decks that don't have access to green, and it's also just a great card in aggressive decks, so it's a really powerful card, and sometimes one that you maybe see a little bit later than you should, because people don't think it fits in their deck when it really just fits into every deck. And then next up is Brush Off. This is maybe the biggest mover up of any card in the format for me. It doesn't look very good as a 2/2 instant counter target spell, and then costs a bit less if you're targeting an instant or sorcery. But counter magic is super important in this format, especially for the late game grindy matchups between like a blue-red converge deck or blue multicolor deck and a blue-green deck. And that's where Brush Off is just absolutely the one card you want to have. It pairs really well with other instant speed shenanigans like Run Behind, which can be another way to spend your mana if your opponent doesn't cast something worth countering with Brush Off. But it's really at its best because of a card like Moment of Reckoning, which is just this supercharged, rare, expensive sorcery, and Brush Off can counter it for 2 mana and save the game. And that's kind of what Brush Off does, is you get to the mid to late game and all of a sudden there's a lot of cards that just don't matter. These random early drop creatures that you're playing to just not die to aggro, you don't really care about those, but what you do care about are these haymaker spells. A lot of the converge spells are also instants and sorceries, so you can counter them for just 2, but it doesn't have to be just instants and sorceries. It's just better that it just makes Brush Off better that some of those big cards are instants and sorceries. You can just still be happy countering like a giant creature, a mythic rare dragon, things of that nature with Brush Off. It's just going to do serious work in the late game, even as a 4-mana counter, and oftentimes it will be a 2-mana counter because so many of these powerful cards are instants and sorceries like Moment of Reckoning, which, by the way, just an incredibly messed up card. If you see Moment of Reckoning playing black-white, even though black-white's like an aggro deck, Moment of Reckoning still worth putting in as like a 7-drop because it just wins you the game whenever you cast it, pretty much. Just absolutely insane card. Anyway, I have this kind of summary sheet that I made to kind of cover a lot of that information, as well as some more general information that I didn't go into in the too nitty gritty, like top commons. But in addition to that, I have the archetype ranks that I was discussing, the color ranks that I was discussing as well, and some of the cards that I was discussing made it onto this list of top commons that you see here. I also have a free PDF version of this on the NicolaiBolas Patreon. You don't need to be a patron to access it. It's just a good place to store this sort of thing so you can continually find it. And so you can find that at patreon.com/NicolaiBolas. And if you are enjoying my videos and you'd like to gain access to some cool bonuses, then you can support over there as well. But you can access the free PDF there without supporting. You don't need to be a patron. You don't need to be a patron. You can just kind of find the PDF there if you want to download it or print it or something of that nature. That's going to do it for this one, though. Thank you so much for watching. If you made it to the end, leave #draft secrets in the comment section down below. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll talk to you next time.